The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Variety Channel. For more information about our network and to check out additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit VoiceAmericaVariety.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit VoiceAmerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the hosts or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Relationship Radio with your host, Jim Duzak. Are you interested in marriage, divorce, midlife dating? Keep it tuned right here for the next hour as Jim and his guest explore some fascinating and important topics. Now, here's your host, Jim Duzak.
Hello, and welcome to Relationship Radio. I'm Jim Duzak. I'm a divorce lawyer and mediator, a columnist for ConnectionsForWomen.com and BoomerLiving.com, and the author of the book Midlife Divorce and the Rebirth of Commitment. At one time, I even owned a dating service. You can learn more about me if you'd like by visiting my website, www.attorneyatlove.com. But Relationship Radio is not about me, it's about my guest. It's also about you, the listener. Each week I have a conversation with my guest on real-world topics related to marriage, divorce, post-divorce, or midlife dating, and other aspects of men-women relationships. I'm hoping the conversation will be so lively and informative that it draws you in and makes you think, even as you're being entertained. Today's guest is Carole Brody Fleet. If her name sounds familiar, it may be because you've heard of her best-selling book or maybe even read it. It's called Widows Wear Stilettos. She also has a CD of the same name, and she's been on a number of national TV shows such as Good Morning America, as well as numerous radio shows. Carole was still in her 30s when her husband was diagnosed with ALS, often called Lou Gehrig's disease. For over 2 years, she was a caregiver to her husband while managing to raise her preteen daughter. She was 40 when her husband finally passed away. As a young widow, she quickly learned that there was very little out there in the way of books, support groups, or other organizations that specifically addressed the needs of young widows, particularly those with kids at home. Everything seemed to be geared towards the stereotype of the late-in-life widow. Although Carole managed by trial and error to get through the difficult early years of widowhood, she became determined to do something to help others who find themselves, unfortunately, in her situation. In fact, she's done a lot more than just doing something. She's pretty much devoted her life to the cause of young widows. Her website, widowswearstilettos.com, has become the online resource for young widows. Carole, it's great to have you on Relationship Radio.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. You know, Carole, since I first heard of you and your work and started reading your book, I can't read the newspaper without thinking of you and about young widows in general. You know, whether it's a story about soldiers killed in Iraq or a 30-year-old man killed in a motorcycle accident or an industrial accident of some sort, there's often a young woman who we don't always read about in the story, but who has suffered a tragic loss at a very young age. There are a lot of young widows out there, aren't there?
That's right. And, you know, it's great, Jim, that we've got you thinking about that young widow, the person that's left behind, because unfortunately she's not thought about. She feels kind of faceless. And one of the primary goals of Widows Wear Stilettos is to put a face on the millions of women who are touched by widowhood at the younger ages.
Mm-hmm. And young can mean very young, can't it?
Absolutely. I've got widows as young as 17 years of age. And that is a very humbling situation when you have a 17-year-old writing to you that she's just lost her husband.
It's really, you're right, sad, and you're right, the average person just doesn't even think of that.
Of course not. In fact, when I became widowed, and like you said, I was 40, I thought that I was so incredibly young. You talk about a reality check.
Right.
When you are hearing from girls that are in their teens that have just had to go through the nightmare of and tragedy of burying their husband. And I'm quick to follow that by saying anybody of any age who has lost their spouse is going through a terrible time. And we work with widows up until their late 80s because, you know, age is just an attitude. And I'm never, ever going to be the person saying, well, you're too old to be a young widow, because I get that question a lot, too. But the issues that we target and the questions that we're answering tend to target the younger demographics more, because those are the issues that haven't been talked about.
Mm-hmm. You know, I spoke briefly in the introduction about your husband and the Lou Gehrig's disease, but and of course your life since then has been dominated by your writing and all the work you do with your website and the Widows Wear Stilettos groups. But maybe our listeners would like to know a little bit about your life before then. You were in the cosmetics industry? You were an executive of some sort?
I was. Actually, by education and degree, I'm a paralegal. So you and I speak the same, speak legalese.
That's right.
And,
try not to do it on the show.
I know.
We want to make this accessible for everybody.
Exactly. But I left the legal profession after 15 years and did become a sales director for a major cosmetics company. My husband was an award-winning police officer and was a police officer for 28 years. And together we were, raising a child and doing what millions of other Americans are doing. And all of that came to a screeching halt when he was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease.
And he was, obviously you say he was a police officer. He was apparently, or seemed to be, a perfectly healthy person before that.
Oh, absolutely. The stereotypical, never sick a day in his life. He got a cold once a year, and that was usually courtesy of our daughter, because, those kids bring home everything.
Of course.
But yeah, never sick a day in his life. Very, very physical, very vital. He was either on a horse or chasing a bad guy, or in his capacity as a canine handler, he was training dogs and teaching canine training throughout California. So he was very physical and very vital.
The last person you would ever have imagined.
Absolutely, but isn't that's famous last words, isn't it?
Yeah.
Never sick a day in his life. In fact, it became kind of a rueful running joke when he was ill. Really, the rest of him was checking out just fine, and it kind of became a sad kind of running gag that, except for the terminal illness, he tells me is
right. He's in great shape.
Yeah, he was. I mean, his heart and the blood pressure and everything that we spent a great deal of time worrying about, everything was fine, except for this illness, which is a complete enigma, as you know.
That's right. It's wonderful in a way that the two of you were able to see, if you want to call it this, some humor in it, or at least irony in it.
We had to. We had to. Because if you're not laughing, then you're sobbing in that situation. And that's really a lot of the basis for Widows Wear Stilettos is, you've read the book, Jim.
Yes, I
There are humorous components to it. Now, we all know that there's nothing funny about being a widow, and there's nothing funny about widowhood, per se, but some of the things that happen to you on your journey are humorous, or can be looked at in a humorous vein.
Like what?
Like the things that people say to you in the guise of meaning well. People say things to you that they really need to say to themselves quietly first before it comes out their mouth. And the reason that I chose to take a humorous approach to that subject is so many widows are being very wounded by the things they're being told. And by taking a humorous look at it, letting them know you're not the only person hearing these things, and then providing a solution for healing from it, we're actually moving forward.
Well, people in this day and age are not, and maybe this has always been the case, are not too shy about expressing their opinions. And I'm sure that in the case of widows, you get all kinds of opinions, including, how you should live your life and how you should honor the memory of your late husband and all these kinds of things. And everybody has, I would think, their own idea of what's appropriate.
That is a huge, huge issue, and I am so glad you brought that up, because we are all surrounded by opinions, regardless of what life challenge has befallen us, whether it's opinions on what to do with our money or how to dress or what to do with our careers. We're all surrounded by opinions. The problem is with widow, who is already not in a super clear state of mind at that moment in time. The opinions she's getting and what she's feeling are most of the time two different things. And what she is hearing when I tell you, Jim, well, it's been 6 months, you ought to be over it by now. Mm. What she is thinking is, well, I'm not over it, and they think I should be over it, so something's wrong with me.
Are those typically the kinds of questions? I know that you get an enormous number of emails, close to 1,000 a week, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
People through your website, which, as I'll say it again, is www.widowswearstilettos.com. Is that one of the more common things that you get? Is the people who are confused about, well, what is normal?
Yes, or what is normal? When is it okay to? What is appropriate? When can I? Mm-hmm. So many questions are prefaced just that way that it did lead to the second book, which is in progress right now, is that there are so many questions, and what they're looking for really is permission. Mm-hmm. They're looking for someone to say, you know what, it's okay for you to fill in the blank. Date again, fall in love again, change your job, take your wedding rings off, leave your wedding rings on. Mm-hmm. They're looking for some kind of validation or vindication or something that flies in the face of the opinions or the things they're being told by people who aren't widowed.
Right.
And even if you are a widow, my timeline might not necessarily be the same as someone else's timeline. For example, I very intentionally took the first year after my husband's death off as far as socializing or even the thought of dating. Mm-hmm. That's what worked.
You also had an 11-year-old daughter at the time.
I did. And I needed to concentrate on her and her healing journey. And I also needed to concentrate on my career, which obviously, got kind of back-burnered throughout the pendency of my husband's illness. And had I to do it over again, I'd do it the same way. But for other women, that might not work. I talk to women who are 4 or 5 years along in the process of healing, and they haven't had a date yet, and they're not ready to go there yet. That's okay, too.
So most of the time, or I shouldn't say most of the time, but you certainly get a lot of calls from people that are not necessarily looking for advice, but to validate their own decision that they've made.
Exactly. You need to tell somebody, you need to be able to look at them and say, dead to rights, no pun intended, the decisions that you are making is what's working for you. And as long as you are not coping in a destructive manner, as long as you are not causing harm to you or to anybody around you, what you're doing or what you want to do is okay. And if you feel like you need more help, additional help, get it.
Carole, this is really fascinating stuff. We've got to take a short break right now, but we'll be right back with more information and insights from our guest, Carole Brody Fleet, author of the best-selling Widows Wear Stilettos. This is Relationship Radio, and I'm Jim Duzak.
Ask the experts. Call toll-free right now, 1-866-472-5787. And ask our All-Star team to answer your question. That's 1-866-472-5787.
Thank you for calling.
VoiceAmerica.com.
Hi, I'm Jim Duzak, host of Voice America's Relationship Radio. I'm the author of a book called Midlife Divorce and the Rebirth of Commitment. It's a book that deals not only with divorce, but with how to enhance your marriage and possibly avoid divorce. Every chapter of the book contains real-world information and advice on issues like sex, money, communication, in-law problems, and the temptation to have an affair. For those thinking of separating or filing for divorce, the book explains how to do it the right way. It also deals with the critical issues of life after divorce, including when to start dating again and how to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. If you visit my website, www.attorneyatlove.com, you can read excerpts from all 17 chapters of the book. If you'd like to order the book, the site has direct links to Amazon.com and the other major online booksellers. And you can use the site to contact me. I'd love to hear from you.
The latest business information is made simple with the Voice America Business Network. The professionals in the business world bring you live talk radio shows featuring an array of business topics. strategies for building wealth, sales and marketing, stock trading, investing, and business technology. Voice America Business hosts are professionals in their fields and bring to the airwaves weekly business discussions that offer up-to-date information, advice, and education. The Voice America Business Network, the bottom line in business talk. Want to have behind-the-scenes access to some of the greatest minds of today? On Shift in Action, we feature leading-edge innovators who are building a more conscious, sustainable, and healthy culture. Host Stephen Dinan offers live shows with evolutionary leaders such as Deepak Chopra, Van Jones, and others who are creating new paradigms for conscious living. You can keep your finger on the pulse of the latest frontier work with our weekly transmission of inspired wisdom on Shift in Action, broadcast live every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time, noon Eastern Time on Voice America.
Stimulating talk.
It gets those synapses in the brain firing really fast.
All the time. The #1 Internet talk station where your opinion counts. VoiceAmerica.com.
You're listening to Relationship Radio with your host, Jim Duzak, an inside look at marriage, divorce, and midlife dating. Now, back to Jim Duzak.
Welcome back. We're talking today with Carole Brody Fleet, the author of the best-selling Widows Wear Stilettos, a practical and emotional guide for the young widow. Carole's website is www.widowswearstilettos.com. And if you'd like, you can use the website to contact her. As we found out a moment ago, a lot of people do. Carole, one thing I wanted to ask you, given your situation and your husband's illness, you were essentially a caregiver, and it sounds like a full-time caregiver for, about 2.5 years before your husband's death?
Yes.
You know, I don't know if everyone would feel the same way, but it seems to me that being a caregiver to a spouse sounds even tougher than having to deal with the spouse's death. Was that your impression?
In a manner of speaking, yes, and that sounds kind of odd, but in any caregiving situation, regardless of the illness, the demand on you physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually is enormous. Mm-hmm. And, keep in mind that those of us who have been in a caregiver situation, most of the time we also have a career, and most of the time there are children involved in one respect or another. And in our situation, obviously there still had to be an income provided to the house, and there was still a 9-year-old child running around who needed care and feeding and activities and so forth. So the challenges are numerous.
Mm-hmm. Now, I would think that the toughest of all the caregiver situations, probably wouldn't apply to your situation, but would be when your spouse has a condition that leaves him totally incapacitated, but is not necessarily terminal. In other words, a stroke, for example. The person could die next week or still be alive 20 years from now.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, that kind of uncertainty must be torture, I would think.
It is. It is absolute torture, and I have to say, and I'll be a little controversial in doing so, mm-hmm. if there is any situation that is worse than widowhood, it is that situation. We've coined it being a married widow or a married widower.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, your life is permanently on hold in certain ways.
It's absolutely on hold because your role as spouse is over. You are not a spouse in the tradition, the husband-wife sense of the phrase. You have evolved into nurse-patient. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about something that involves incapacity, whether it's stroke or accident or any kind of traumatic brain injury or situation like that, mm-hmm. that situation can be permanent and stationary for 20, 30 years. You can be brain affected and physically fine.
Right.
And that is a horrendous situation to be in. I've got a number of women who are members of Widows Wear Stilettos through the site who are themselves married widows.
Well, I'm glad they've heard about you because you would think that, they may, look at the title of your book, let's say, in a bookstore and say, well, that doesn't apply to me. I'm glad that somebody must have suggested that they go on your site.
Well, the fun thing is, the great thing is that the title evokes enough curiosity so that people go, Widows Wear Stilettos, what's that about? And so a lot of people have found us that way through trial and error. I just heard from a woman today. I was honored to have won an award from State Farm Insurance Companies last year, and I'm featured in their magazine this month.
Oh, really?
And,
congratulations.
Yes. So thank you. And a woman who received their magazine, it's received by about 2 million people, emailed me today. Her husband, as we speak, is about to die from brain cancer. And she happened to pick up the magazine, find the website, and her first thought was, thank God there's help for me. Because this whole time that he's been battling, she hasn't been able to get that help.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the mission, isn't it?
It certainly is as you've defined it, and listening to you, I'm wondering how you manage to do all of it. Do you have a staff of people that helps you with all these inquiries you get? Seriously, I just wonder how you physically are able to find the time in the day to do it all.
I'm very blessed that I've got a marvelous team of people in place, from the production company in charge of the website. I've got a credible agent. I've got just wonderful people who believe that I believe. And then, of course, my family is second to none in terms of support and patience. Because, sometimes I am on the air at 3 or 4 in the morning for our friends on the East Coast and internationally.
Right.
And sometimes I'm gone. And that's difficult. That's hard on a family. So I'm very, very fortunate that I've got a lot of support and a lot of reinforcement.
You mentioned before that the title of your book, Widows Wear Stilettos, is certainly an attention getter, and it definitely is. But I wonder if it sometimes might be misleading in the sense that somebody might read it and say, or not necessarily read the book, but
and go in the wrong direction.
And say, well, that's not for somebody like me. I don't look like Carole Brody Fleet, and I never wear stilettos. I'm really a Birkenstock person or something.
You know what? I have had women ask me, with a straight face, do you have to wear stilettos? And I said, no, I need to explain, it's a metaphor. The title was born from actually a moment at my own husband's funeral, when I, too, ascribed to the stereotype of a widow being someone who's somewhat older, maybe she's retired, she's got grandchildren, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm wearing 4-inch heels, I listen to heavy metal music, I don't know what a widow is, but she's not supposed to be me. So really, the title became a metaphor for younger widows, for optimism, and most of all, hope.
I think it's a great title. I really do.
Thank you. But yeah, it has evoked curiosity. So we are getting women who are not necessarily younger chronologically. We are getting women who are the married widow. We're getting people who know that they are facing widowhood, like our new friend that wrote to me today. Right. And we have men who are also a member of Widows Wear Stilettos, and they're not wearing high heels either.
Do you try to help them, or do you feel your insights are somehow don't apply to men?
Well, one of the common questions I get is, are you leaving widowers out? Mm-hmm. And my answer is a resounding no, of course not. Again, you've read the book, and you know that a lot of what's in there absolutely applies to widowers as well as widows, but it may come as a shock to you to learn that I am not a man. And because I am not a man, I felt that it would have been presumptuous and possibly even insulting to look at a widower and say, I know how you feel, because I don't. A male perspective on this is completely different than it is for a woman. So I really felt more qualified to write for widows from a widow perspective rather than look at a man who's lost his wife and say, I know exactly how you feel. But, of course, we welcome our widower friends with open arms.
That's really good. I think I don't think it was in your book, but maybe I read this on your website somewhere, that you had you talk about catchy phrases and things. You talked about dating by jury. and I love that phrase. And I think you said it has to do with when friends, relatives, and adult children are quick to express their opinions about whether and when and or if a widow is supposed to get back into the dating world. Is that something that comes up a lot with your readers?
It's an enormous issue. I'm really glad that you brought it up because that's a paradigm I'm working very hard to shift. First, you have the widow who has lost her husband, and her first thought process is, well, that's it for me. I've caught my limit. I'm not allowed to have companionship again, fall in love again. That is such a huge myth. Just by the fact that we are here, we are entitled to an abundant life, and that includes companionship and love if we choose it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that you get a widow to the place and the point where she is ready to step out in the dating world again, and that's a whole other show.
Yeah.
And then she's got her adult children or people around her who don't want to see her with somebody else, or they feel that it's, quote here, inappropriate.
Right.
And
sort of the opposite in many ways of what women, or men too, I suppose, after divorce go through, because there, oftentimes, if it was a nasty divorce or if the husband was not the greatest of husbands, the adult kids may be saying, Mom, come on, do it. You really need to go out and, show him that, you can do fine without him and, that kind of thing. But you don't get that in widowhood.
Exactly. But see, when you lose somebody, the person that you've lost, a lot of times death elevates them to sainthood, and if you've been married to a saint, you're not supposed to, put that in quotes too, you're not supposed to fall in love again, and that is so not true. What I did when I started dating again, and at the time Kendall, our daughter, was 11, 12 years old, I said, nobody's ever going to replace your daddy. Never, ever, ever. But it is okay to love your past, honor your past, and not live in your past. And when I approached it that way, in combination with helping to honor the past and keeping that past alive, I created the environment where she understood that it was okay for new love to come into my life. And as you know, Jim, I just recently became engaged to the most incredible man.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. He is absolutely wonderful. I love him to pieces. And again, a very special person in that he supports this mission that I'm on wholeheartedly, 1,000%. But
as your daughter reached the point where not only does she approve the general idea of you're seeing somebody, but does she get along well with your fiancé too?
Oh, probably, and sometimes she gets along better with him than I do. Because I test him every single day. But yeah, she does. But again, it was recognized that he's not a replacement for Dad. He augments our life.
That's really interesting. We've got to take one more short break, but we'll be right back with more information and insight from our guest, Carole Brody Fleet. This is Relationship Radio, and I'm Jim Duzak.
Talk, talk, talk. That's all we do is talk. If you'd like to talk, call us toll-free right now at 1-866-472-5787. 1-866-472-5787. That's it. VoiceAmerica.com.
Hi, I'm Jim Duzak, host of Voice America's Relationship Radio. I'm the author of a book called Midlife Divorce and the Rebirth of Commitment. It's a book that deals not only with divorce, but with how to enhance your marriage and possibly avoid divorce. Every chapter of the book contains real-world information and advice on issues like sex, money, communication, in-law problems, and the temptation to have an affair. For those thinking of separating or filing for divorce, the book explains how to do it the right way. It also deals with the critical issues of life after divorce, including when to start dating again and how to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. If you visit my website, www.attorneyatlove.com, you can read excerpts from all 17 chapters of the book. If you'd like to order the book, the site has direct links to Amazon.com and the other major online booksellers. And you can use the site to contact me. I'd love to hear from you.
Are Are you ready to grow your business? Listen for the Independent Business Owners Show with your coach, Rick Corrado. This entertaining talk radio program will bring you the tools to help increase your business. You'll learn sales success, time management, lead generation, business development, life balance, and much more. Rick Corrado is here to help you take your business to the next level. Listen for the Independent Business Owners Show, heard live every Monday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific on the Voice America Business Network.
The biggest secret about men is that they are far more complicated than we often give them credit for. Join Dr. Chris Blazina as we discover more about the secret lives of men. This is an informative and positive program exploring the various facets of men's lives, from growing up to growing old. The Secret Lives of Men with Dr. Chris Blazina is broadcast live every Tuesday afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time on Voice America.
Streaming live, the leader in Internet Talk Radio, VoiceAmerica.com.
You're listening to Relationship Radio with your host, Jim Duzak, an inside look at marriage, divorce, and midlife dating. Now, back to Jim Duzak.
Hello again. We're talking today with Carole Brody Fleet, the author of the best-selling Widows Wear Stilettos, a practical and emotional guide for the young widow. Carole's website is www.widowswearstilettos.com. Carole, we were talking before the break, we were getting into the subject of dating and if and when and how and to resume getting back into that scene after the death of a spouse. And we were saying how sometimes, people, including your own children, I don't mean just you personally, but
right.
Anyone's adult children may have their own opinions on that, which may or may not coincide with that of the widow. But, there are all kinds of, I don't know if stereotypes is the right word, but there certainly is a belief out there that that people who date widows, or widowers for that matter, they're always kind of gun shy about it because they fear that they'll never be able to live up to that sort of sainted image of the deceased spouse. Is that something that really does happen in real life?
It absolutely does happen, but and this might seem a little unfair, but the onus here is on the widow or widower to allay that fear, to let that person know that, again, you will always have love for your late spouse because nobody left that marriage willingly, trust me.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, you can have love for your late spouse, but then love again here today, now. The burden, if you will, is on the widowed to convey that message. And also, I talk about Mike, pretty regularly. I'll refer to him or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But my fiance has never once felt in competition with a ghost or what have you, because I don't spend my entire life talking about it. I'm not falling apart in tears. If I were, that means that I'm still in the grieving process. I need to step back. And I need to continue grieving.
I think that relates to something that you talked about in your book that I remember. You said, I think you used the phrase that you need to treasure and honor the past, but without living in the past.
That's exactly right.
That is a delicate balance, isn't it?
Yeah. People confuse that issue. If you walk into my house right now, Jim, there are very, very subtle nods to Mike's memory in the house that to the untrained eye you'd have no idea they were nods to Mike's memory. And then Kendall, in her room, because she still lives at home, she has pictures of her dad up all over the place, and she has pictures of him in her car even. But if let's say that you are my fiance and you walk in and there is this huge shrine with pictures and awards and everything,
right?
How would you feel?
Where the house is basically a shrine to him,
right? Now, again, when you're initially widowed, that's pretty normal to have that. That's a baby step process where you start putting things away or changing rooms with these things or what have you. But you can't stay steeped in the past and move forward. So I do teach about how to honor the past without living in the past, and that you can always love your late spouse and then love somebody new and wonderful today, too.
Yeah, that is great advice. You know, we were talking about dating a moment ago, and it hit me that there's another stereotype that you probably have your thoughts about, but I have heard this expressed that people feel that the only person that could ever understand what it's like to be a widow or a widower is someone else who has lost their spouse. And for that reason, I know that I personally know some, both widows and widowers who pretty much restrict their search to people who have been through the same process. Does that make sense to you? Or
I don't. Well, I think that you should not overly restrict yourself, let's say, in the dating prospect. Why eliminate, a huge part of any population? As long as you're comfortable and it's obviously certain parameters are met, I would be very loath to have restricted myself to just widowers, because here's what happens, Jim, and obviously widows and widowers get together all the time, and that's wonderful. But let's say I'm restricting myself to that, okay?
Yep.
Now I have eliminated a lot of people. My fiancé is not a widower. I can't imagine my life without this man. He's not a widower. But here's what happens. You're a widow, and you meet a widower, and you go out on that first date. What are you talking about?
Well, you tell me. I suppose it would be obvious that, it would be normal to ask questions.
Exactly. Well, no, you're talking about your late spouses.
Right.
Now, in a regular dating situation, if I'm going out with somebody who is not widowed, they're going to ask me, how did you lose your husband? I'm going to tell them. They're going to say, oh, wow, that's terrible, and be very kind. I'm going to say thank you, and then we're going to move on. There's more of a tendency when everybody's widowed to stay in that widow place.
More of a support group than a date.
Exactly. And what this is supposed to be about is getting to know each other. And
You're right about that.
You can exchange information and stories by all means, but at what point do we quit doing that and move forward from it? And again, I know this might be controversial, and if a widow meets a widower, I think it's phenomenal. But to restrict yourself based on your marital status as a widow, I think I think it can be damaging. I like to tell people, widowhood shapes you. It does not define you. There's a huge difference.
That's an interesting concept. And you seem to definitely be doing a good job of making it clear that you are not issuing the 10 Commandments of widowhood as laid down by Carole Brody Fleet. You know what I mean? In other words, I think you're laying out the options to people, and you're helping them to define what it is they really want, but you're not saying that do what I did because that's the only way to go.
Yeah, there is no only one way, but you put it very aptly when I said defining options, because these are people who think they don't have any options, or their options are being defined by people who really don't get it and don't really have any business telling someone what to do. Mm-hmm. It goes back to those opinions that we're surrounded by.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm coming out with is, this is, I know how you feel because I felt the same way, or I went through the same experience. This is what worked for me. It might work for you as well. And I don't care if that's dating or how to handle a child or how to cook when you've got one less mouth to feed.
Mm-hmm.
This is what worked for me, and let me offer you another way of trying something or looking at things or what have you. That's all it is. It's just another point of view.
One thing as we were talking, I was wondering is, getting back to your experience as a mother, did having the day-to-day responsibilities of motherhood, particularly at what's normally a tough time in a young girl's life, help you in dealing with your adjustment? In other words, did it keep you from, or did it avoid did it remove the luxury, so to speak, of just moping around and feeling sorry for yourself?
It absolutely did, and in fact, I use the word luxury in the book. You don't have the luxury of giving into whatever emotion you're feeling at that moment. And to me, going into the fetal position was not an option to begin with. But
you had to get back to your career too.
Well, that too. But I also recognize that the important lessons that our children learn are caught, not taught. And I knew that my daughter was watching me and how Mommy was going to react and move forward. And I wanted to show her we can absolutely get knocked down with the worst experience of our lives, and we can get up, we can brush off our backsides, and we can start to heal. And I'm going to take you with me, and it's going to be okay. Even if you don't feel that on the inside at the moment, our children are entitled to receive that attitude. It's going to be okay.
Is she doing as well as you are now?
I think she's doing wonderfully well. Of course, she will always miss her dad. She always is paying, homage to him, and well, she should. But at the same time, she quite enjoys the life that we have now. And again, she supports the mission. In fact, when she used to have a column on the website called Dear Kendall, or Kendall's Corner, and children would write to her, and she would answer their letters, and she's actually made some friends through the website.
Boy, that's really great.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think she's just a phenomenal example of overcoming obstacles, and especially when you consider that, children, and like you pointed out, she was on the cusp of adolescence at the time, you can take the road less traveled or you can take the path of least resistance. And she could have chosen any one of a number of destructive, anesthetizing coping methods, and instead she faced it. She faced it soberly and, seeking help when she needed it from the people who could provide it, and really came through it, I think, as well as any child could.
Yeah, that's just wonderful. You mentioned a little bit earlier that you are hard at work on a sequel, maybe I could call it, or a second book. Can you expand a little bit on that and share with us what that's all about?
Absolutely. It became very apparent with all of these letters that it was screaming for a second book where all of these questions, many of them are the same question, all of these questions needed to be answered, and it needed to be answered in a big universal way. And because my agent doesn't think I have anything else to do, he said, Carole, this is your second book right here. So we will be introducing Widows Wear Stilettos, the Answer Book.
The Answer Book.
The Answer Book, the ultimate reference guide for widows. And this book is compiled of actual questions that have been asked through the website with all identifiers and names and removed to protect privacy.
Well, Carole, I wish we could be talking all afternoon here, but we have to go into another break. But it has been such a pleasure having you on. Carole's book, and it's a great one, is Widows Wear Stilettos, and her website is widowswearstilettos.com. Thank you again, Carole, for being here.
Thank you.
For those listeners, I am coming back for one more segment, so don't leave. Thank you.
Have you ever thought about having your own internet talk show? Well, if you said yes, then click About Us. Then click Be a Host to get more information. Or just call Jeff Spinard at 480-294-6417.
Say that again?
480-294-6417. VoiceAmerica.com.
Hi, I'm Jim Duzak, host of Voice America's Relationship Radio. I'm the author of a book called Midlife Divorce and the Rebirth of Commitment. It's a book that deals not only with divorce, but with how to enhance your marriage and possibly avoid divorce. Every chapter of the book contains real-world information and advice on issues like sex, money, communication, in-law problems, and the temptation to have an affair. For those thinking of separating or filing for divorce, the book explains how to do it the right way. It also deals with the critical issues of life after divorce, including when to start dating again and how to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. If you visit my website, www.attorneyatlove.com, you can read excerpts from all 17 chapters of the book. If you'd like to order the book, the site has direct links to Amazon.com and the other major online booksellers. And you can use the site to contact me. I'd love to hear from you.
Total career success. What does it mean to you? Voice America presents a radio program dedicated to help you achieve your career goal. Even in times of economic uncertainty, you can achieve your financial goals. Whether you're a college grad, new in the working environment, or a top-level executive, you will benefit from the practical and proven advice on job search and career advancement. Join Ken and Cheryl Dawson every Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern for Total Career Success on Voice America.
Wake up with a unique daily show. Listen for Mitchell John in the morning. Mitchell will bring you news, sports, and stock news from yesterday. You'll hear interviews from high-profile figures from the world of sports, entertainment, politics, and authors. Mitchell will talk to people throughout America. This is a show that throws right down the center. It's fun, information, and yes, even a little bit of music. Catch Mitchell John in the morning at 6 a.m. Pacific Time, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays on Voice America, and Thursdays on the Voice America Business Network.
The Internet's #1 talk station. #1 talk station. VoiceAmerica.com.
You're listening to Relationship Radio with your host, Jim Duzak, an inside look at marriage, divorce, and midlife dating. Now, back to Jim Duzak.
Hello again. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Carole Brody Fleet as much as I did. She's really a remarkable woman, and I hope for those of you who unfortunately may have been affected personally by widowhood or know somebody that has, I hope you'll send that person to her site, www.widowswearstilettos.com. I may have mentioned earlier that in addition to being an author and a talk show host, I'm a lawyer. Since lawyers always love to plead their case, I call this final segment of each show my closing argument. What I try to do each week is to make my case, so to speak, on a particular relationship issue and offer some advice that you might be able to use right now. The issue I'll be discussing today is hard times can actually be good for your marriage. And that's not a misprint. Hard times actually can be good for your marriage. But don't get me wrong. I'm not happy about the housing market any more than you are, or the unemployment level, or the rapidly shrinking value of our 401k funds. And I know all too well how financial stress can lead to marital stress. The only reason that the divorce rate hasn't gone up in the last year is that for most couples it's too expensive to break up. One half of nothing is nothing. And the same income that's barely enough to keep one household afloat can't be expected to pay for two of them. So a lot of couples are postponing divorce but staying together in an uneasy truce, barely speaking to each other except to argue about money and to blame each other for the mess they're in. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe you should ride out the bad times together, not just because you're forced to, but because bad times can provide a common purpose and a new beginning. Instead of it being the two of you against each other, it can be the two of you against the world. But the first thing you have to do is to stop blaming each other. In marriages where money is a constant issue, there's usually plenty of blame to go around. Although you sometimes see marriages where one spouse is frugal and responsible and the other is a compulsive, reckless spender, most of the time both spouses contributed to the mess they find themselves in. He had to have his Harley or his $1,000 set of golf clubs or his trip to Vegas. She had to have her cosmetic surgery, her Neiman Marcus card, and her lunches at the wine bar. And both of them had to have that big house and the timeshare in Cancun. Blaming the other person is just going to prolong the misery and keep you from digging your way out. What you have to do instead is to take a cold, hard, unemotional look at your finances and then set two goals. The first goal is getting out of the current mess as quickly as possible. The second goal is preventing similar messes from happening in the future. The first goal, getting out of the current mess, is harder because it's a shock to the system. If you're in a financial bind, you probably can't get out of it without making some immediate and painful changes. Some things are going to have to go. The motorcycle, for example. Unless it's your primary source of transportation, get rid of it. The boat, unless you make your living as a fisherman, get rid of it. The SUV you never take off-road, get rid of it. The designer clothes and handbags that are cluttering your closet, get rid of them. It doesn't matter if you have to take a big hit on these things. It doesn't matter if getting rid of them is only going to put a few bucks in your pocket. What does matter is that by getting rid of the non-essentials in your life, you're admitting to yourself and to each other that you're willing to do something real, something painful, to get back on your feet. And by getting rid of tangible things like boats and SUVs, you literally don't have to see them again. That Hummer in the garage is a constant reminder of the past, of the mistakes of the past. Once it's gone, a part of the past is gone too, and you can start focusing on the future. And when you start accomplishing these things, celebrate the success. I don't mean by going out to Morton's Steakhouse and adding to your already overloaded Visa bill. I mean by congratulating each other and expressing your appreciation for what he or she has done to help both of you. The second goal I mentioned is to prevent the problem from happening again. This is actually easier because once you've somehow gotten through the existing situation, you will have started to develop better spending and saving habits. More importantly, perhaps, the two of you will have had some honest and difficult discussions about your finances. You're probably more likely to be on the same page as you were before, more likely to think of yourself as a team when it comes to finances, and less likely to automatically blame the other person for everything that's gone wrong. So if you're struggling financially, and who isn't these days, at least see it as an opportunity to shed some bad habits, to get on the same page as your spouse, and to start thinking and acting as a team again. And on top of everything else, think what you're saving on divorce lawyers. Okay, before we wrap up the show, I want to tell you briefly about next week's guest. Next week's guest, it will be Lauren Bloom, the author of a very interesting and I think important book, The Art of the Apology. I've always felt that in marriages, a lot of bad feelings and maybe even a lot of divorces could be prevented if husbands and wives could just overcome their pride and apologize for something they did wrong. It should be simple, right? But often it's not. Listen next week when Lauren Bloom tells us how to do it, when to do it, and how to avoid a botched-up apology that'll only make things worse. Until then, this is Jim Duzak. Have a great weekend, spread some love around, and I'll see you next Friday. Bye for now.
Thanks again for joining us this week on Relationship Radio with Jim Duzak. Please join us again next Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time on Voice America. Have a great weekend.
Thanks again for listening to the preceding program, brought to you on the Voice America Variety Channel. For more information about our network and to check out additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit VoiceAmericaVariety.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live